Hey guys, tonight we're going to dissect the horrifying hygiene secrets of Queen Elizabeth I, under the blistering Greenwich sun from her quarterly royal baths, to the foul Thames water, to that brutal animal of fat and ash soap. You wouldn't last a minute in a world where water can both save you and kill you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Please comment below where you're watching from and what time it is in your local time. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Habit 1. Bathing once every 3 months. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. And imagine yourself in the hushed stillness of Whitehall Palace. Outside, the summer sun beats down relentlessly on damp stone. Inside, everything slows to a whisper. The soft echo of footsteps on ancient wood and the gentle warmth rising from oil lamps. Every 90 days, Queen Elizabeth I's order summons the elaborate quarterly bath. This is no quick scrub, but a spectacle of ceremony and power. Dozens of ladies in waiting and guards carry a massive copper tub into the Queen's private chamber. Faint golden light plays on its engraved surface as rising steam carries the fragrances of rose petals, frankincense, and cleansing herbs. The ritual unfolds over hours. First, a maid dips soft linen cloths into a warm mixture of apple cider vinegar and herbal oils. They gently wipe the Queen's skin shoulders to feet to seal her pores against vile miasmas. Next, Elizabeth steps into the tub. Pale skin meeting, steaming water heated over coal fires. Attendants ladle scented water infused with rose, frankincense, and antiseptic herbs over her shoulders, back, and neck in a slow, rhythmic blessing of warmth. When the main bath concludes, the Queen is wrapped not in a towel but in thick cotton, drenched in fragrant wax and dried ginger. For the next 24 hours, she remains swathed in this protective armor, believed to lock out disease-bearing vapors. Yet quarterly bathing brings no true freshness. In 3 months, sweat, dead skin, and oils reaccumulate beneath layers of linen and scented powders. In the folds under her arms and behind her neck, small clumps of these mixtures cling stubbornly. Courtiers recorded Elizabeth's repeated bouts of itching and skin irritation caused by this rare perfumed cleanser. All the ceremony, the copper tub, the drifting incense, the gold-threaded garments masks a harsh reality. 16th century England lacked clean water infrastructure, and medical beliefs demonized frequent washing. Water, even laced with precious blooms, remained public enemy number 1. The Queen's ritual bath stands as a poignant symbol of an age where splendor and fear coexisted in a cloud of fragrant steam. Now, as you drift alongside me in this soothing haze, let your muscles relax. Follow the gentle hiss of warm water, and allow these haunting customs of Elizabeth I's hygiene to lull you towards sleep, where the secrets buried in water and white powder await in your dreams. Habit 2. Always keeping her feet filthy and moldy. When Queen Elizabeth I emerged from her quarterly bath, shrouded in fragrant, wax-soaked cloth, few noticed the hidden horror at her feet. Beneath sumptuous layers of skirts and towering leather heels lay her second dreadful habit. She almost never properly washed her feet, turning them into breeding grounds for fungus and bacteria. Imagine those feet confined all day in tightly laced leather shoes, lined with fine silk or linen. By afternoon, the fabric was soaked through with sweat, trapping moisture against her skin. This warm, humid environment invited tinea and other foot fungi, which thrived between her toes and on her soles. Small cracks formed, weeping fluids that smelled of pungent cheese gone bad. Rather than a soothing foot bath, Elizabeth relied on her ladies-in-waiting to dab each toe with linen cloths soaked in vinegar and salt. The acidic liquid stung tender, cracked skinninly, making the sores deeper and the pain sharper. Meanwhile, her prized leather heels gathered every drop of fluid, clinging to scabs, dead skin, and living fungus, silently festering in the dark. Courtiers often spoke in hushed tones of the rancid tang that rose from her footwear. Each step sounded like a soft, wet, slippering noise as her foot slid against the damp lining. Any servant tasked with changing her stockings would hold their breath, toss the soiled pair into a corner, and reach for fresh linens as swiftly as possible. On formal occasions, Elizabeth sometimes slipped off one shoe behind a tapestry to relieve unbearable itching. A maid would step forward, remove the shoe, and press a vinegar-soaked cloth to her foot, an act performed behind closed doors to hide her discomfort from guests. But once the new stockings were drawn on, the cycle began anew. Sweater-soaked fabric, fungal growth, and a creeping smell that floated unseen beneath her courtly robes. This careless neglect led to more than mere odour. Deep cracks and persistent inflammation risked serious infections. Though invisible to onlookers, the Queen's feet were a battlefield of bacteria, causing fevers, chills, and constant throbbing that she bore in silence. Even her graceful walk was a testament to stoic endurance. At night, she might lower her feet into a basin of lukewarm water, just long enough to loosen debris before returning to her bedchamber. Yet without proper soap, the rinse barely touched the root of the problem. Small clusters of fungus clung to her skin, waiting to bloom again under the next layer of stiff leather. Despite her gilded status, Elizabeth's feet suffered as much as any commoner's. The Queen's second habit reveals the grim reality behind historic grandeur, that even the greatest monarch was powerless against poor hygiene knowledge and the absence of clean, dedicated foot care. Habit 3. An unsanitary bedchamber and filthy bed. Having walked through the misery of her constantly infected feet, we now glide seamlessly into Habit 3, the hidden horrors of Queen Elizabeth I's private bedchamber, where every lapse in hygiene converged in a heady miasma of decay. As dusk settles on Whitehall, Elizabeth withdraws to a room draped in deep crimson velvet and golden damascan opulent facade concealing a realm of neglect. Here repose, once a symbol of royal luxury, is layered with blankets and coverlets, so seldom laundered that they bear the imprint of years of sweat, bodily fluids, and the detritus of countless nights. On the polished oak posts, heavy curtains are drawn, but they, too, are stiff with dust and withered from neglect. The bed linen silk sheets, linen underlays, and plush velvet spreads are infrequently changed. Courtiers recall that only when the fabric turned a jaundiced yellow would attendants risk airing them in the rare sunbreaks of London's perpetually overcast sky. Even then, the damp beneath dozens of layers remained, fostering mould and mildew. The once-soft fabrics hardened into an armour of grime, rustling with dry rot and exhaling a musty tang that clung stubbornly to the air. Atop the bed lie her prized feather pillows, ostensibly plump and inviting, but in truth soaked through with perspiration and skin excretions. Underneath the delicate silken cases, the feathers matted into soggy nests of bacteria. Many a night Elizabeth pressed her face to these pillows, only to inhale a choking blend of pungent ammonia and the faintly sweet rot of damp down. Servants who dared to clean the chamber report treading gingerly upon the mattress, fearful of crushing throngs of bedbugs that scuttled within the folds. Each step produced a soft crackle of dust and detritus, as if the bed itself were whispering tales of its own decay. Rat droppings and threadbare patches revealed where rodents had taken up residence, nibbling at fabric edges in the gloom. In this squalid cocoon, Elizabeth forsook any hope of a true, refreshing rest. Each night, before settling among these filthy layers, she would wrap herself tightly in a long linen, cloth soaked in vinegar. Rosemary and other pungent herbs form a makeshift barrier against the pervasive miasma and crawling insects. The tang of vinegar cut through the mustiness, but could not soothe the itch of countless bites or the uneasy knowledge that she lay atop centuries of accumulated neglect. Sleep became a precarious act of endurance rather than a refuge. The slightest rustle of curtain or mattress echoed in the stillness, and the oppressive weight of unwashed fabrics pressed upon her like an invisible shroud. In coffee amber candlelight, the room's shadows danced across walls streaked with flaking plaster and corroded brass sconces, reinforcing the inescapable truth. Even a king's daughter could not conquer the marauding forces of fungus, vermin, and rot. This third habit, sleeping in a chamber so thoroughly contaminated, reveals the extreme lengths to which Elizabeth subscribed to dry hygiene, shunning water and clean linens for layers of perfumed barriers. Yet those barriers only compounded her suffering, encouraging infections of the skin and respiratory troubles from constant exposure to mold and dust. So now, as you settle deeper into your own clean sheets, let the quiet rustle of velvet and the distant flicker of lamplight carry you towards sleep. In your dreams, imagine stepping lightly through that stifling bedchamber, passing unscathed by bedbugs, bacteria, and the haunting weight of history's most unsanitary royal residence. Habit 4. Rotten teeth and oral decay. Following the damp horrors of her bedchamber, we now turn our focus to the most infamous of Elizabeth I's personal afflictions, her ravaged smile. The Queen's insatiable sweet tooth led her to consume vast amounts of sugar-candied violets, fruit preserves, sweet wines, until her enamel turned from brown to inky black. With no toothbrush or toothpaste in sight, she relied instead on occasional rinses of wine or rosewater mixed with vinegar, hoping to mask the stench rather than heal the rot. As decay spread, her teeth loosened and fractured under the slightest bite. Royal physicians, powerless to save her, resorted to excruciating extractions. Seated on a velvet-upholstered chair, Elizabeth gripped the arms as courtiers held their breath while a court dentist yanked out one tattered tooth after another. The sound of cracking enamel and wet spit echoed unnervingly in the silent chamber, leaving behind empty, painful gaps. Her breath became a nightmare of odors. Foreign ambassadors recorded having to breathe through folded cloths or carry pomanders of sweet herbs just to endure an audience. In 1579, the French envoy complained that he had to press a handful of hyssop to his nose to survive a 10-minute minute with official dispatches, diplomatically attributing his distress to the Queen's powerful dignity. Hesen, unable to chew solid food, Elizabeth subsisted on broths and finely strained gruels, sipping medicinal potions to dull the constant throb. Courtiers learned to watch her closely. A hand raised to her jaw was the unmistakable signal of a throbbing abscess. Rumor has it she would slip away from banquets, feigning illness, to spare herself the agony and spare guests further embarrassment. Medical treatments of the era ranged from rinsing with urine believed to disinfect to applying pearl powder crushed in sake. One extreme remedy involved heating a red-hot iron against the jaw to cauterize infected gums. Each intervention left fresh scars in her mouth, compounding the misery. By her 40s, Elizabeth's teeth were but blackened stumps. Portraits conceal this horror beneath a perfectly painted mask, but written accounts cannot hide the truth. The once a bright smile of England's Virgin Queen had become a symbol of oral catastrophe. Now, as you lie in your own bed, feel the comfort of clean linens and fresh breath. Let the haunting image of Elizabeth's decayed teeth drift away, and allow yourself to settle into pure, untroubled, sleep free from the echoes of courtly agony and the stench of sugar-fueled ruin. Habit 5. A filthy oral cavity and tongue. Just as the Queen's blackened smile faded behind her toxic white mask, we uncover yet another horror, the inside of Elizabeth I's mouth, where a thick film of debris and rotting cells formed a breeding ground for bacteria, producing a stench so foul that anyone nearby recoiled. Elizabeth I didn't merely suffer from decayed teeth, her entire oral cavity was a cesspool. Her tongue, instead of smooth and pink, was coated in a dense layer of old food particles and dead cells. mixed with viscous saliva, teeming with untold microbes. Every time her tongue brushed the roof of her mouth, the sound was akin to turning the pages of a moldy book, and the odour rose like stagnant sewer water infused with sour wine. In the royal court, there was no concept of tongue scraping. Elizabeth owned no instrument to clear this debris. When the coating felt oppressive, she would wrap a fingertip in linen, dip it in diluted vinegar, and lightly wipe her only hope for cleaning. But the vinegar only dried out her delicate mucosa, making her tongue rough and cracked. Her gums swelled and bled each time she brushed with a vinegar-soaked cloth after meals. Whenever Elizabeth parted her lips to address her council, an awful wave of stench burst forth. Courtiers, those closest to her, clutched pomanders of sweet herbs or held linens perfumed with essential oils before their noses, trying desperately to breathe normally. Foreign ambassadors wrote home that they had to breathe through layers of cloth to withstand a single audience, fearing the rotting fish odour assaulting their nostrils. Some dispatches even noted, "I pressed a rose petal to my nose throughout the entire audience, lest I faint from the stench." There was no modern antiseptic rinse. The court's only mouthwash was wine, mixed with vinegar-accrued concoction that only dried out mucous membranes and worsened inflammation. Some prominent physicians recommended the Queen rinse with her own urine, believing the ammonia might disinfect, yet nothing could dislodge the stubborn brown film clinging to her tongue and palate, which grew thicker by the day. Candida yeast, Streptococcus bacteria, and myriad oral parasites thrived in Elizabeth's mouth. As they fermented, they produced sulfur and lactic acids, intensifying the rot. Her tongue ached continually, especially when the tiny cracks from vinegar scalds sealed over, each papilla feeling like 1,000 needles. Her gums inflamed and bled at the slightest touch, prompting her to chew scorching herbs like pepper or chili powder to numb the pain. But the moment the burn hit, the bacterial stench soared anew. This refusal to properly clean her oral cavity turned Elizabeth's mouth into a lasting spectre of the court, a dreadful maw where breath was not regal but a warm, bacterial lament. Each word she uttered seemed wrapped in a gaudy haze of scent, yet could not conceal the underlying foulness. In Kita moments before her mirror, Elizabeth nibbled candied nuts, sipped rosewater, or tasted sweet wine, anything soft enough to swallow. Courtiers watched her wince. Her lips pursed, as she traded one kind of pain for another in the service of royal composure. And when night fell, she would hold in her mouth a blend of apple cider vinegar and herbal infusions, hoping it would balance her oral flora. The soft slosh of liquid echoed in the oil-lit chamber, mingling with incense smoke and the musty smell of linen. Attendants prepared a small basin nearby, but none dared change the water or launder the cloths used for her mouth. The era's greatest doctors, despite their prowess, could only tally abscesses and gum infections. They prescribed pearl powder, crushed into rice wine, believing crushed shells would scour away the slime. Instead, the irritant powder worsened her inflamed gums, spreading pus and a metallic tang through her mouth. In the end, when Elizabeth I departed a world of perfumed gowns and scented wigs, the memory of her brown-coated tongue and fetid breath lingered strongest in court lore. Her story stands as a grim testament to what happens when hygiene beliefs lag behind medical reality, when even the most powerful body becomes host to microbial armies, and a queen must carry the phantom odour of decay to her very last breath. Now, as you nestle under your clean sheets, let the whisper of sliding debris and the echo of Elizabeth's laboured breath lull you into deep sleep. In your dream, you might find yourself tasting a spoonful of honey's sweetness-seeking, that pure freshness Elizabeth Tudor could only imagine. Habit 6. Accumulation of sweat, dead skin, and heavy fragrances, just as we concluded Habit 5 by lingering on the rancid stench of Elizabeth I's mouth. We now turn to Habit 6, her body's constant burden of sweat. dead skin, and an ever-thickening shell of powders and perfumes in the 90 days between each royal bath. The Queen shunned water entirely. Instead, she relied on a ritual of dry hygiene, smearing scented oils and various powders flour, ground turmeric across her skin, then wrapping herself in multiple layers of fine linen. To the casual observer, this might look like an elaborate costume. In truth, it was a living trap, imprisoning moisture and debris against her flesh. At the first drop of sweat, the scented oils melded with her perspiration, forming oily streaks beneath her collarbones, beneath her arms and at her elbows. The powders quickly absorbed moisture and clumped together with dead skin cells, creating hardened, cracked patches. With each movement, she could hear the soft rustle and crackle of powder rubbing against linen, an incessant reminder that her body was breathing out its own filth. After every grand feast, traces of animal fat from roasted pork to buttery sauces lingered on her skin. The sweet, cloying aroma of wine blended with greasy residue, and to mask it, she layered on new powders and costly perfumes imported from the East. Courtiers whispered that her scent became as pungent as a cauldron of rotting meat, prompting guests to lean away, discreetly sniffing pomanders or dabbing their wrists with scented cloths. But these fragrant coverings did more harm than good. The trapped moisture and dead skin served as a banquet for skin-dwelling bacteria Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, and countless mites. Over time, small red patches of inflamed skin appeared, then tiny pustules, until Elizabeth's arms and torso broke out in clusters of painful bumps. Each application of more powder or ointment only sealed more sweat and debris into her pores, worsening the inflammation. Occasionally, frightened by creeping fevers or chills, courtiers would glimpse her arms and observe the weeping sores. If addressed at all, the treatment involved slathering on Mediterranean herbal salvus olive oil infused with rosemary or lavender butt. These two mixed with the powders into a stiff, crusted layer that flaked off in painful shards. Despite her opulence, Elizabeth's body became an involuntary carrier of infection. Rumors circulated of minor outbreaks of illness, skin eruptions, swollen lymph nodes among those closest to her person, likely spread through the microscopic clouds of bacteria that drifted from her robes. At night, she might unwrap herself from the layered linens and stand before a small basin of lukewarm water, allowing the surface grime to drift away, but with no soap or scrubbing tool, only the topmost filth washed off. When she rewrapped in fresh linen, sometimes the same sheets hastily aired, the cycle resumed. Habit 6 thus reveals the grim paradox. Her ornate layers of scent and powder, meant to present regal purity, instead fostered a mobile breeding ground for disease. The more she sought protection, the deeper she sank into a miasma of her own making. And so, as you settle into the comfort of your own clean sheets, let the thought of those caked layers of sweat and dead skin fade away. In your dreams, may you sleep unburdened, free from the weight of centuries-old powders and the hidden toll of a queen's dry hygiene. Habit 7. Eating to terrifying bloating. After immersing ourselves in the heady fragrances and crusted powders that caked her skin, we now turn our gaze to Queen Elizabeth. Eyes swelling abdomen, a testament to her gluttonous diet that unleashed nightmarish bouts of bloating throughout her splendid court. Elizabeth was renowned for her insatiable love of sweets. At banquets, platters of candied herbs were stacked into lofty pyramids, rosa-petal confections gilded in gold leaf, fruit preserves steeped in honey, almond pastries dusted with jasmine sugar. As each jewel-like morsel caught the torchlight, she would lift it to her lips and let the sugar dissolve slowly, letting waves of sweetness flood her mouth. But her indulgence did not stop at confections. The royal menu overflowed with fats and roasts, honey-glazed duck crisped to a golden crunch, pork crackling, shimmering with fat, beer-braised game birds, seafood bathed in lemony butera, feast of layer upon layer of rich, heavy flavours. Elizabeth rarely settled for a single taste. She habitually returned for seconds and thirds, combining sugar, grease, and vast portions of harder-to-digest fare that constantly overloaded her stomach. To combat the inevitable constipationa, common affliction among the nobility court physicians prescribed potent laxatives. They brewed powerful decoctions of cumin and fennel seeds, mixed with strong wine and honey. Yet, with so little fruit or fibre in her diet, these herbal pills provoked violent intestinal contractions and excruciating cramps. As if that were not enough, the ultimate cure for hidden ailments at the time was mercurial toxic metal compound. Mercury was administered as a broad-spectrum vermifuge, believed to purge the body of all impurities. In practice, a dollop of mercury was stirred into thin gruel or medicinal syrups, resulting in agonizing abdominal pain, nausea, and spasms. There were occasions when the Queen could no longer contain herself. Waves of gas and bloating forced her to clutch her stomach in agony. At Magnifice Banquet, instead of smiling graciously, she would grow pale and withdrawn as her gut gurgled and rumbled. The courtiers nearest to her could hear low, ominous noises, like wind whispering through a narrow japanned smell, a fetid odour akin to an overflowing spring. To conceal the embarrassment, attendants hurriedly produced vinegar-soaked and perfumed linens, holding them over their noses whenever Elizabeth spoke. They hoped that a single breath through that cloth might mask the stench, yet within moments, the foul odour would return, saturating the hall and causing guests to step back, pretend to yawn, disguising their horror. When her bloating became unbearable, Elizabeth would excuse herself from the table for personal reasons. Everyone knew she required urgent access to the privy. In the narrow corridor between wooden benches, the sound of the portable chamber pot wheels and the hush of her skirts sweeping the floor marked her passage. Courtiers watched, aware that moments later the walls of that private room would ring with the true sound of relief and that its odour would cling to the tapestries long after. Thus unfolded a cycle of endless agony, from the dizzying sweetness of sugar, the lulling richness of fat, to desperate sprints through palace corridors in search of digestion. This gluttonous diet and chronic digestive turmoil turned every royal feast into a test not only of olfactory endurance, but of gastrointestinal survival for all who attended. Many who heard these tales shook their heads in disbelief, wondering how Elizabeth could bear such cramps without collapsing. Perhaps it was her ironclad belief in her own power that sustained her. Courtiers often reminded one another. The Queen must remain steadfast, even if her body protests. Hi, and now, as you nestle into your warm bed, let your thoughts drift to those distended bellies of a dazzling yet chaotic era. Let the soft rumble and ebbing echo of those digestive winds carry you gently into deep sleep free from any anxieties about digestion. Habit 8. Letting her garments grow filthy. Following the agony of buzzed and bacterium-ridden flesh, we now shift our focus upward to the sumptuous yet soiled wardrobe of Queen Elizabeth I's 8th grim habit, preserving and accumulating dirt within her opulent attire. Elizabeth possessed over 0 gowns of silk, velvet, and brocade, embroidered with gold threads and pearl seech, a marvel of craftsmanship. Yet these treasured garments were almost never laundered. Instead, they were draped in the sun for a few hours when they turned too yellow, brushed gently with bory hair brushes to smooth the surface, and sprayed lightly with precious perfume to mask odours. Of course, such perfunctory airing did nothing to remove the real stains. Under candlelight, oily sweat from her linen shifts dyed the fabric around her neckline, flakes of dead skin dusted her sleeves, and, in moments of urgent need, small dribbles of urine and discharges from raw skin lesions soaked the underlayers. Each gown became a living map of the Queen's personal functions: yellower-stained collars, darkened armpits, and tiny punctures marking the friction of fabric on irritated flesh. Beneath every gown, her corsets and linen shifts, though briefly rinsed in water, mixed with vinegar, remained damp and imperfectly cleaned. The tight lace stays, press sweat and bodily fluids into every seam, creating a humid microclimate perfect for bacteria and mold to flourish. Meanwhile, her more elaborate outer layers, heavy brocade, delicate lace, and beaded trims were too fragile for soaking in soap or scrubbing, so they, too, were simply left hanging in the wardrobe, absorbing the stale air and clinging to the faintest traces of scent dripping from each thread. When Elizabeth walked through the palace's grand halls, the stale odour of rancid oils and fermenting sweat trailed behind her. Courtiers recoiled, ducking behind columns or leaning against walls, inhaling scented pomanders they held to their noses. Even amidst music and chatter, guests surrendered to the unsettling swirl of fragrances, jasmine-laced musk, battling the underlying stench of rot. In truth, each gown had become a mobile incubator for staphylococcus and streptococcus bacteria, and for countless mold spores. The humid layers of fabric fostered tiny colonies that feasted on starches, oils, and sloughed-off skin cells. Beneath the corset's tight embrace, these germs pressed through seams to touch her bare flesh, triggering inflamed follicles and painful rashes along her torso. On rare occasions, Elizabeth would slip away behind a heavy velvet curtain to have her shifts replaced, and her body gently wiped with vinegar-soaked cloths. Yet only moments later, new sweat and skin oils reactivated the same bacterial bloom. The scent of decay clung to her nightly boudoir, only masked by the rising curls of incense smoke. The consequences extended beyond mere discomfort. Records hint that a handful of attendants developed persistent skin irritations after handling those garments, their hands reddened and blistered by contact with bacterial-laden fibers. Even the palace's tapestries and seating bore the same stench, forcing servants to don vinegar-dampened gloves when cleaning. Elizabeth maintained this practice through her entire 45-year reign, turning the magnificent royal wardrobe into a permanent, living lab of contamination. Each wardrobe closet stored an archive of microbial life, chronicling every feast, every perspiration, every secret of her private body. Now, as you nestle under your linen sheets in the calm of your own bedchamber, let your thoughts drift among those gilded yet festered robes. Imagine each stitch harbouring unseen life, each fold whispering the history of neglect. This is the haunting legacy of a queen who ruled with unmatched power and allowed her garments to reveal the inescapable truth that no amount of thread or pearl can cleanse a filthy soul. Habit 9. Infested wigs and scalp infections. After her 30th birthday, Elizabeth I discovered that the lead in her whiteface makeup was causing her hair to fall out in clumps. To conceal her bald patches, she turned to elaborate wigs composed of thousands of strands of peasant hair, roughly cleaned and often still carrying soil, lice eggs, mites, and the seller's sweat. Court wig makers offered only the most cursory cleaning, brushing the hair with wood ash mixed with a few drops of perfume to disguise the odour, then stitching it onto a linen base treated with beeswax and scented oils to hold its shape. Rusty metal pins and zinc wires secured the lace net, but under the warmth of her head, sweat and natural oils fused with the wax and ash, creating a hardened, greasy mass. Beneath this construction, Elizabeth's scalp became a breeding ground for infection. Staphylococcus and streptococcus bacteria thrived in tiny cracks, while lice and mites burrowed into the moist environment. Small pustules and inflamed sores cropped up across her crown, itching unbearably, though she sometimes summoned a lady waiting to gently remove the wig and wipe her scalp with herb-infused cloths, rosemary, chamomile, and dandelion root. The relief lasted only hours before the sores flared up again. Showering or washing her scalp was never an option. Removing the wig meant discarding the entire hairstyle and risking a visible display of hair loss unthinkable for a monarch famed for red gold tresses. Elizabeth endured the constant discomfort, scratching until her fingertips bled, leaving smears of blood on her linen gloves. At public events, she wore towering wigs that concealed the worst of her scalp's condition. Yet courtiers spoke in hushed tones of the faint stench, a mix of rancid sweat, wax, and decaying organic matter. Guests would inch away or dab perfumed cloths to their noses. Though the fumes never fully masked the underlying rot, over time, her scalp infection became chronic, depriving her of sleep as she tossed and turned, restless from the ceaseless itching. Royal physicians, faced with a case they could neither bathe nor medicate properly, prescribed herbal balm olive oil infused with apple cider vinegar and frankincense. But when these salves matted into her wig base, they formed hard crusts that worsened the irritation. On sleepless nights, Elizabeth would peel off her wig in the dim glow of chamber candles, revealing flakes of dried wax and ash falling onto the floor like brittle snow. The carpetants, a symbol of courtly splendor, became littered with soiled hair and scabs. Attendants donned leather gloves to clean up, bracing themselves against the hair-clogged basin and the overpowering odor. By the final years of her reign, her wigs grew heavier and more elaborate, layers upon layers of hair stitched and pinned in an attempt to fully cover her scalp. When she finally removed them, she was confronted with a tangled mess of hair fragments and festering source and image far removed from the portrait-perfect monarch. Elizabeth's refusal to wash her scalp, for fear of ruining her regal coiffure, locked her in a cycle of infection and misery. It stands as a stark reminder that even the most powerful ruler could not escape the simplest human need for cleanliness, and that the pursuit of splendor sometimes demands a terrible price. So as you settle into your own pillow, imagine the relief of clean hair and a healthy scalp. Let the slow, soothing rhythm of your breath carry you away from the memory of that brittle, infected crown far, from the relentless itching and crusted wax that plagued a queen's final days. Habit 10. Drenching herself in overwhelming perfume. Having explored every ghastly secret of her body's unwashed skin and decaying mouth, we arrive at Elizabeth I's 10th and most extravagant habit, bathing herself in layers of costly perfume to mask her overpowering stench. Dame, before the first rays of sunlight slipped through the Tudor windows, the Queen would be anointed with the finest fragrances: precious civet oil harvested from African jennet glands, ambergris ocean's snowflake collected on Atlantic shores, humble ambrette seeds from India, and rich musk from Central Asia. These scents were not merely dabbed on her flesh, they were misted onto her gowns, wigs, and even the velvet draperies of her private chambers, creating a scented canopy intended to banish all poisonous airs. Yet 16th century perfumes were crude by modern standards, distilled from animal fats and resinous woods. Under her body heat, each droplet of perfume quickly turned rancid, mingling with her sweat. The sweetness of her diet, the odor of leady-tinted hair dyes, and the infection of her scalp, the result was a bizarre, nauseating cocktail of fragrances. Courtiers, those with the closest view, recorded that instead of concealing foulness, these perfumes multiplied it, forcing them to press vinegar-soaked linen over their noses in desperation. Elizabeth believed these scents sealed her pores, preventing miasma from entering her body. In reality, the oils and powders clogged every pore, turning her skin into a sealed vault where bacteria thrived unchecked. Within her expansive chambers, mists of perfume mixed with stale decay, settling onto cushions, drapes, and wooden beams as a permanent cloud of odor. Whenever Elizabeth crossed a room, silver scenter sprayers clicked rhythmically, releasing gouts of perfume that assaulted the nostrils of all in attendance. Guests shrank into shadowed alcoves, clutching scented handkerchiefs to their faces. Yet none could fully escape the onslaught. Power had never smelled so bitter. The very fragrances meant to assert her majesty instead became a double-bledged sword, revealing the rot beneath her regal veneer. Over time, this overuse of perfume created a vicious cycle. The animalic musk and civet blended with grease and perspiration under the harsh glow of candles, mutating into what witnesses likened to blooms of sewage water, a medium of supposed salvation transformed into an intensifier of revulsion, fusing decomposition, filth, and microbial life into a single, cloying fog. This practice did more than thicken the aromate, thwarted any attempt at real hygiene. Once coated in layers of perfume, no amount of dryer washing, powdered rinses, or vinegar cloths could restore freshness. The more Elizabeth doused herself, the more her body odor intensified, and the heavier the floral mask became, imprisoning the court in a space of compounded pollution, decadent stench that defined her reign. No matter how exquisite the perfume, it could not eliminate the bacteria living on her skin or the debris lodged in her pores. The archaic recipe of animal fats and resins only hid the problem briefly. Within hours, her sweat reactivated the rancid notes, morphing them into acrid, sour tangs that clung to anyone breathing near her. For over 40 years, Elizabeth I maintained this image of a queen perfumed as if by 1,000 blossoms. In truth, she dwelled in a maelstrom of scent and rotor, tragic, unintentional experiment in which perfume and bacteria danced together, creating perhaps the most nauseating aroma ever recorded in royal history. And now, as you close your eyes, let your mind escape that artificial bouquet. Dream, instead of natural floral breezes, of dry forest wood, or the fresh scent of clean skin after rain. These are the fragrances we truly cherish, far removed from the chaotic miasma Elizabeth Tudor endured in her quest to maintain power. We've just reviewed the 10 most horrifying hygiene habits of Elizabeth I, from her rotten smile to overpowering perfumes. But there are still 3 more terrible routines waiting to be uncovered. Let's continue exploring them in the next part. Habit 11. Constantly wearing a toxic lead foundation. At the very first light of dawn filtering through the Tudor window, Elizabeth I began her daily beauty ritual, and Habit 11 is revealed. She slathered her face with a heavy layer of white lead powder, known as lead blanc, mixed with vinegar to scrape away every freckle, age spot, and redness. The lead mixture stung as soon as it touched her skin, but Elizabeth had to sit perfectly still for hours while it dried completely. Any slight movement of her facial muscles could crack the powder prematurely, exposing rough, red patches beneath the snowy white surface. Once the lead had set like a hardened crust, the second stage began. She glided a polished steel razor sharp as a surgeon's blade across her skin to scrape away the old layer of makeup. Each stroke peeled the powder away in flakes, as brittle as crumbling plaster, and occasionally her fingers would catch the living skin beneath, tearing off layers of the epidermis. Fresh blood welled up in tiny rivulets, staining the white walls of her dressing chamber. A few hours later, Elizabeth applied an even thicker coat of lead powder. The overlapping layers formed a mask several millimeters thick, as rigid as dry bark, dead skin cells and scabs from the previous scraping, still unhealed, became trapped beneath the new layer. Unable to recover, day after day, her face became a map of wounds, a rough, pitted forehead, swollen cheeks, dark, scaly patches at her chin where the powder had chipped, and countless indented scars across her cheeks. The lead didn't merely sit on the surface. Through microscopic cracks it seeped into her skin and entered her bloodstream. Elizabeth endured a barrage of symptoms: chronic fatigue, severe insomnia, persistent headaches, and trembling fits. Long, sleepless nights found her tossing on her bed, her face cracked and bleeding, her mind hazy with dizziness from lead poisoning. Numerous times, attendants witnessed her trembling before the mirror, the razor in her hand shaking uncontrollably as she fought to complete her ritual. The flakes of lead powder rained down onto the wooden floorboards, shattering into gritty dust. The acidic scent of vinegar and metallic tang of lead poisoned the air so sharply that anyone nearby had to turn away. Throughout her 40-year reign, Elizabeth's obsession with a snow-white complexion never waned. She believed that a flawless visage symbolized her power and warded off all hostility. Yet it was this very habit of lead makeup that ravaged her skin, transforming her face into a horrifying testament to the poison's effects. Artists' portraits hid the terror beneath a perfect shell, preserving only the image of a pristine queen, while the toxic layers beneath slowly destroyed living tissue. Despite advice from royal physicians and herbalists, Elizabeth refused to abandon lead. They proposed alternatives: finely ground pearl powder or turmeric, mixed with honey and ginger butt. She dismissed them as insufficiently lasting and incapable of achieving her signature pale tone. She declared proudly, "Only lead is strong enough to conceal my natural flaws." The consequences went beyond mere vanity. In her later years, she frequently forgot conversations due to migraine pains, and spasms sometimes seized her hand mid-application, nearly driving the razor close to her eye. Ladies-in-waiting had to steady the blade to prevent serious injury. It was not until her final day, during preparations for her burial, that the last toxic crust of lead was washed away with strong spirits and vinegar. Most of her scars and open sores remained. Even after her body was wrapped in fresh linens, courtiers recorded that the acrid smell of lead lingered, forcing the dressing chamber to be sealed for months to detoxify the air. When Elizabeth I passed away, she left behind heaps of lead flakes scattered on the floor, transforming her once lavish boudoir into a grim relic of poison. And now, as you drift towards sleep, let tranquility fill your mind and distance you from the image of that lead-stained mask peeling away living skin. Dream instead of smooth. Clean skin under the gentle golden moonlight. A simple fantasy compared to the terrible price paid to maintain Elizabeth Tudor's flawless facade for 45 years. Habit 12. Bathing in polluted Thames water. After witnessing the distilled perfumes and toxic lead foundation, we now follow Elizabeth I into her bathing ritual, supplied entirely by the Thames, London's most polluted river. This is Habit 12, a ceremony that sounds majestic but hides a lethal risk. The bath water was drawn directly from the docks across the river. In an era before modern sewers, household waste, animal carcasses cast off the banks, and fat runoff from slaughterhouses and tanneries all flowed unchecked into the Thames. The water ran thick with sediment, reeked of excrement, and carried the stench of drowned rats. Before it reached the palace, attendants boiled this murky brew in oversized copper cauldrons. Steam billowed across the stone courtyard as labourers hauled heavy iron tubs into the bathing chamber. They strained the water through coarse linen several times, hoping to filter out the solids, but no amount of makeshift filtering could remove the foul odour or the microscopic contaminants. When Elizabeth first dipped a toe into the opaque brown water, she held her breath against the assault of floating leaf fragments, animal grease, and rotting food scraps. Each ladle of water carried pungent fumes, charred wood perfumed with faded petals, the putrid tang of long-dead rodents, and the sour smell of decayed leather. Believing that potent essential oils and turmeric powder would shield her skin, Elizabeth closed her eyes and endured the brew. She trusted that these fragrant and antiseptic additives would repel disease. Meanwhile, her attendants pressed vinegar-soaked linen over their faces, pressing close to avoid inhaling the rancid vapors. Some even wore embroidered scented scarves as a second barrier. In reality, boiling this putrid water merely removed the most obvious smell sit, did nothing to kill heat-resistant pathogens. The temperature rarely reached levels sufficient to destroy fungal spores, parasites, or bacteria such as Salmonella and E. coli. After her bath, Elizabeth's skin flushed bright red, itching fiercely at thin areas like her wrists and the inside of her elbows. Any tiny scratch became an open invitation to infection. Delicate new skin, not yet healed, confronted a slurry of bacteria and toxic algae. Contemporary medical treatises record cases of chronic folliculitis, relentless ulcerations, and even high fevers following royal baths. The greatest irony was that a ritual meant to cleanse and demonstrate sovereign power became an unwitting microbiological experiment. Each immersion risked skin infections, respiratory illness from inhaled spores, and nausea from algal toxins. Palace records note that after every royal bath, Elizabeth remained secluded in her private suite for 2 days to allow her skin to calm. Often she postponed audiences, citing headaches and blistering around her neck. Courtiers would carry her to a convalescent chamber, where they gently wiped her skin with vinegar-dipped cloths and anti-inflammatory herbal poultices, but within hours, her skin would crack and weep again. This habit laid bare the lack of clean water infrastructure and the era's flawed medical theories, while Londoners outside came to dread the Thames's black tide. The royal household was powerless against it, forced to sacrifice their health to uphold the quarterly bath, ritual both a display of power and a testament to the enduring fear of miasma among the nobility. Now, as you rest in the comfort of modern plumbing and fresh water, imagine Elizabeth I submerged in that fetid stream. Let your mind drift to crystal-clear mountain springs and the gentle burble of woodland brooks, for in those pure waters lies the luxury that even a mighty queen could never attain. Habit 13. Using crude soap made from animal fat and wood ash. In Elizabeth I's era, there was no refined soap. The royal soap recipe consisted of rancid pig or cattle, Phaeton kitchen scraps combined with hearth ash, wood ash, sawdust ash, and lime ash, and caustic lye extracted from plant ashes, mixed with hot water. This concoction produced a harsh cleansing agent with strong abrasive properties that was terribly brutal on the skin. During her baths, Elizabeth and her ladies-waiting scrubbed every inch of her body with this crude soap. The Queen's skin would flush bright red and sting fiercely, often shedding not only dirt but layers of the stratum corneum along with it. The rancid animal fat emitted a sour odor, while the grey-black wood ash left stubborn residue that resisted rinsing. After the scrubbing, attendants dutifully wiped her down with vinegar-diluted linen cloths to neutralize some of the harsh alkaline smell. This soap was not designed for gentle hygiene, but for scouring away, diligently removing both living and dead skin cells. Habitual use of such a caustic cleanser subjected Elizabeth's skin to constant irritation, inflammation, and painful vesicles. Palace records note multiple occasions when the Queen cried out in agony as the scalding mixture burned her delicate flesh. Yet no one dared object, for such pain is the price of royalty. Relying on unrefined soap and crude lye revealed the limitations of pre-modern medicine. There was no understanding of the skin's need for a natural protective barrier. This reckless cleansing practice forced Elizabeth to shed her old, odorous skin, only to expose tender new layers. Vulnerable to infection? Over time, these repeated assaults laid the groundwork for chronic dermatological ailments that would haunt her to the end of her reign. And so, with each bath in that stinging brew, the Queen traded one skin for another, each more fragile than the last, demonstrating that even regal privilege could not spare one from the basic need for gentle, proper care. Part 13. The regret revealed by Elizabeth I's funeral aftermath. When Queen Elizabeth I passed away at Richmond Palace on the 24th of March, the tragedy of her lifelong neglect of hygiene was laid bare in the most harrowing way. Her funeral preparations exposed the grim reality of decades spent in filth. In the antechamber where her coffin lay, once-see luxurious garments were piled in disarray, soaked through with blood and oozing bodily fluids. The rich silks and velvets that once dazzled on grand occasions now reeked of decay so intense that no servant dared remain overnight. Incense burned endlessly as attendants tried to mask the stench. Some chambers were sealed completely, deemed too contaminated for habitation. At dawn, Royal physicians and attendants hurried to cleanse her body. They poured strong spirits and vinegar over her skin, scrubbing vigorously to remove the rancid odours. Yet the forceful rubbing revealed festering sores beneath centuries of unwashed dirt, and infection had etched deep ulcerations into her flesh. With each wipe, more of her corpse's mummified tissue came away, leaving fresh wounds that bled anew, once scrubbed as clean as they could manage. Her body was wrapped in pristine linen shifts. Still, the cloth clung to every scar and scab, preserving the imprint of her decay. The air in the chamber remained heavy with the tang of iron and vinegar, a grim testament to the toxins that had saturated her skin. Even after 2 days of cleansing efforts, the pall of contamination lingered, as though her neglect of cleanliness had woven itself into the very fabric of the palace. Courtiers recorded that after the funeral, Hampton Court's bathing quarters were shuttered and condemned. The old tubs and cisterns, tainted by Thames water and centuries of unwashed bodies, were drained and demolished. In their place, a new wing was commissioned, featuring private bathing rooms and a rudimentary network of lead pipes carrying fresh spring water. This overhaul marked the first step toward modern hygiene practices in the English court. Word of the Queen's polluted remains spread swiftly through European courts. Nobles recoiled at the horrifying images of her disinfecting baths and caskets surrounded by burning incense. Other monarchies responded by improving their own water supplies, installing dedicated bathing chambers, and importing refined soaps. Elizabeth's funeral thus became a catalyst for change, transforming royal and public attitudes toward cleanliness. Elizabeth I's final resting place lay in solemn silence, but the lessons of her demise echoed loudly. No ceremonial pomp could disguise the mortal consequences of ignoring basic sanitation. Her coffin, once set in state amidst velvet drapes, that was later moved to a simpler vault, its ornate surroundings deemed too unclean. The hall where she had reigned for 45 years required months of airing and fumigation before anyone dared re-enter. As you settle under the comfort of your clean linens tonight, remember that the luxury of running water and a hot bath is a gift born of past mistakes. Elizabeth I sacrificed her health and in death, exposed a kingdom's failure to uphold rituals rooted in fear of miasma and disdain for water. From her tragic end arose a new era, one where power and compassion converged, and where the value of a single, pure drop of water came to be recognized as a fundamental right. After traversing the 13 most horrifying hygiene habits and witnessing the terrible price paid for royal rituals hidden beneath all that splendor, we've uncovered the darkest corners of Queen Elizabeth I's life and body, from her quarterly baths to dry washing with perfumed oils and turmeric, from her rotten smile and microbe-infested mouth to infected scalps under her wigs, from her toxic lead makeup to bathing in polluted Thames weight-reach practice, wove a gruesome tapestry of what power can demand of the human body. Yet the final legacy of her funeral preparations was not merely the stench or the scars, but a bitter lesson for all of humanity: outdated medical beliefs, fear of miasma, and a dire lack of clean water infrastructure condemned even the most powerful monarch to lifelong bodily torment. Only in her rush to prepare the corpse, scrubbing her skin with spirits and vinegar, wrapping her in fresh linen, did the court fully grasp that no garments, no perfumes, no rituals could forever conceal the filth that devastation had wrought. In the end, Hampton Court itself was forced to pioneer England's first sanitation revolution, building a private bathing wing, installing fresh water pipes, and introducing refined soap. This painful inheritance became our right. The value of a single drop of clean water, the importance of daily washing, and the fusion of scientific understanding with everyday habit. Now, having walked with me through these grim pages of royal history, allow your body and mind to truly rest. Release every muscle, breathe deeply, and imagine warm water never from the Thames but from a modern, crystallo-clean shower, gently washing away your cares. Before you drift off, here's a small request. If you found this haunting journey through history both fascinating and enlightening, Please click subscribe to our channel so you won't miss our latest and greatest videos. Every week, we deliver mysterious tales, little-known historical events, and fresh perspectives on the giants of the past and the moments that shaped our world. Now, dim the lights, draw the curtains softly, and perhaps play some gentle music at low volume to set the mood. Let the sound of rolling waves or rustling leaves guide you into slumber, wishing you a peaceful night and dreams of clear springs and refreshed skin far from the shadows of history. Good night, and I'll see you in the next video, where we continue our journey into the deepest secrets of the past.